America's history is shaped by monumental figures, people who defied the odds, broke barriers, and left an indelible mark on the world. One such man stands out, not just as a great president, but as a symbol of freedom, perseverance, and equality. A man who rose from humble beginnings to lead a divided nation through its darkest days and, in the process, brought an end to one of the most shameful institutions in human history, slavery. Abraham Lincoln's story is not just about politics or policy. It is about the deeply personal battles he fought and the unshakable moral compass that guided him through the most turbulent time in American history. His journey to the presidency, the battles he faced during the Civil War, and the ultimate cost of his commitment to ending slavery make his story a deeply moving and inspiring tale. Today, we embark on an extended journey through the life and legacy of Abraham Lincoln, the president who ended slavery and forever changed the course of history. Long before he was known as the Great Emancipator, Abraham Lincoln was born into a life of struggle. On February 12, 1809, in a small one-room log cabin in Hardin County, Kentucky, he entered the world in modest circumstances. His parents, Thomas and Nancy Lincoln, were farmers, living a hard, laborious life, a far cry from the luxury most associate with political leaders. Growing up, Lincoln was no stranger to adversity. By the age of 9, he lost his mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, to milk sickness, a disease caused by drinking milk from cows that had grazed on poisonous plants. The loss of his mother profoundly affected young Abraham, but it also instilled in him a sense of resilience and determination that would shape his character for years to come. Not long after his mother's death, Lincoln's father remarried a widow, Sarah Bush Johnston. Despite the hardships, Sarah proved to be a nurturing stepmother who encouraged Abraham's love of reading and education. It was Sarah who brought a collection of books into the family, giving young Lincoln access to the world of ideas far beyond his rural surroundings. Lincoln's relationship with his father, however, was strained. Thomas Lincoln was a stern and practical man who saw little value in education, preferring that his son focus on farming and manual labor. But Abraham had other ambitions. He once said, "My father taught me how to work, but he never taught me to love it." One story from Lincoln's childhood captures the tenacity that would later define him. It's said that after borrowing a book from a neighbor, young Abraham accidentally damaged it in the rain. Determined to make things right, he worked for 3 days to repay the debt by pulling weeds and doing farm work for the neighbor. Lincoln's sense of responsibility and commitment to fairness can be traced back to these early experiences. Imagine yourself as a child in those times, with limited opportunities and scarce resources. Lincoln's story reminds us that greatness can spring from the most unlikely of beginnings. His love of reading and learning provided a window into the world beyond the boundaries of his humble life in the frontier. By the time Lincoln reached adulthood, he had developed into a tall, lanky figure, known for his physical strength as much as for his intellect. He worked a variety of ODD jobs, including as a rail splitter, a flatboatman on the Mississippi River, and eventually a store clerk in the small town of New Salem, Illinois. His time working on the river exposed him to the broader world and to the horrors of slavery. While transporting goods down the Mississippi River, Lincoln encountered enslaved people being bought and sold in the bustling markets of New Orleans. This experience left a lasting impression on him, igniting an inner conflict between his belief in equality and the pervasive institution of slavery that he witnessed firsthand. In New Salem, Lincoln's natural wit and storytelling ability made him popular among locals. He quickly gained a reputation as a man of integrity and intellect. His co-workers and neighbors were drawn to his sense of fairness, and he became known for resolving disputes and debates with logic and calmness. But Lincoln's ambition went beyond earning a living. In 1832, he ran for the Illinois state legislature, but the campaign was unsuccessful. Not one to be easily discouraged, Lincoln saw the defeat as an opportunity for growth. Undeterred, he decided to study law on his own, a monumental task considering that formal schooling was practically non-existent in his life. Lincoln often borrowed law books and studied late into the night, eventually passing the bar exam in 1836. One lesser-known story during this period of Lincoln's life illustrates his character. While practicing law, Lincoln once walked miles in freezing weather to return 50 cents to a client whom he had overcharged. This simple act of honesty endeared him to many, further cementing his nickname, Honest Abe. By 1840, Lincoln had become a successful lawyer, with a reputation for his sharp intellect and deep sense of justice. He often defended those who could not afford legal representation, and his courtroom tactics revealed a mind that could balance both compassion and ruthless logic. His skill in argument would later serve him well in the political battles that lay ahead. During this time, Lincoln met Mary Todd, a spirited and politically connected woman from a wealthy Kentucky family. Their courtship was stormy. Lincoln once broke off the engagement, only to rekindle it later. In 1842, they married, forming a partnership that would weather personal tragedy and political triumphs alike. By the mid-1840s, Lincoln's political ambitions were in full swing. He served a term in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1847 to 1849, where he quickly established himself as a thoughtful and pragmatic politician. However, his time in Congress was short-lived, and Lincoln found himself back in Illinois, focusing on his law practice. But Lincoln's passion for politics was far from extinguished. In 1854, the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, legislation that allowed new territories to decide for themselves whether they would permit slavery, reignited Lincoln's resolve to oppose the spread of slavery. The act, proposed by Lincoln's future political rival Stephen A. Douglas, inflamed tensions across the country and spurred Lincoln to return to the political stage. In 1858, Lincoln ran for the U.S. Senate and engaged in a series of debates with Stephen A. Douglas that would go down in history. These debates focused heavily on the issue of slavery and its expansion into new territories. Lincoln argued passionately that while slavery should be tolerated where it already existed, it should not be allowed to spread any further. Although Lincoln lost the Senate race, his performance in the debates catapulted him into the national spotlight. His eloquence, logic, and firm moral stance against slavery drew the attention of many, laying the groundwork for his eventual presidential campaign. By 1860, the United States was teetering on the edge of collapse. The question of slavery had divided the country to the point where civil war seemed inevitable. Abraham Lincoln's campaign for the presidency was built on the idea of preserving the Union and preventing the further expansion of slavery. But he faced fierce opposition, particularly from southern states where slavery was the foundation of the economy. In November 1860, Lincoln was elected the 16th President of the United States. For many in the South, his election was the final straw. Lincoln's opposition to the expansion of slavery was seen as a direct threat to their way of life. And before Lincoln could even take office, 7 southern states had seceded from the Union to form the Confederate States of America. On March 4, 1861, Lincoln took the oath of office. In his inaugural address, he appealed to the southern states, urging them to reconsider their decision to secede. "We are not enemies, but friends," Lincoln declared. "We must not be enemies." Despite his call for unity, the Confederacy refused to rejoin the Union, and just weeks later, the Civil War began with the attack on Fort Sumter in April 1861. The Civil War was a brutal and bloody conflict that would last 4 years and claim the lives of over 600,000 Americans. As president, Lincoln faced unprecedented challenges. He had to navigate the political intricacies of leading a nation at war while managing dissent from both within his own government and the general public. Despite the hardships, Lincoln's resolve never wavered. One of the most significant moments of Lincoln's presidency came in 1862, when he issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. Although the war had originally been fought to preserve the Union, by 1862 it had become clear to Lincoln that slavery was at the heart of the conflict. He saw the war as an opportunity not only to reunite the nation, but to finally bring an end to slavery. On January 1st, 1863, Lincoln issued the final Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all slaves in the Confederate States were to be set free. While it didn't immediately free all enslaved people, it was a turning point in the war and in American history. The proclamation redefined the purpose of the war, and it allowed African Americans to enlist in the Union Army, further tipping the balance in the Union's favor. Lincoln's decision to issue the Emancipation Proclamation was not without controversy. He faced criticism from all sides. Abolitionists felt he had not gone far enough, while others believed he had overstepped his authority. But Lincoln remained steadfast, knowing that the moral and political future of the nation depended on the abolition of slavery. One story that illustrates Lincoln's deep compassion for those affected by the war involves a young soldier who was sentenced to death for desertion. Lincoln, who was deeply moved by the soldier's plea for mercy, personally intervened and granted the man a pardon. "I don't want to see the boy die," Lincoln reportedly said. "He's just as scared as I would be." Moments like these reveal Lincoln's capacity for empathy, even in the midst of war. BY 1865, the Union Army, led by General Ulysses S. Grant, had turned the tide of the war. The Confederacy was on the brink of collapse, and in April of that year, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, effectively ending the Civil War. For Lincoln, this was a bittersweet victory. He had succeeded in preserving the Union and abolishing slavery, but the cost had been immense. As the nation began the long process of healing, Lincoln looked forward to the future. His plans for Reconstruction were marked by a desire for reconciliation and forgiveness, rather than retribution. He believed that the nation's wounds could only be healed through unity and compassion. But Lincoln's vision for the future would never be fully realized. On the evening of April 14, 1865, just 5 days after the Confederate surrender, Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. During the performance, he was shot by John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer. Lincoln was carried to a nearby boarding house, where he died the next morning. The nation was plunged into mourning. Lincoln had become a martyr for the cause of freedom and equality, and his death marked the end of an era. The man who had led the country through its darkest hour was gone, but his legacy would endure. Though Lincoln's life was tragically cut short, his legacy endures. He is remembered not only as the president who preserved the Union and ended slavery, but as a symbol of hope, perseverance, and the unyielding belief in equality. His leadership during the Civil War and his efforts to bring about the abolition of slavery set the stage for the 13th Amendment, which was passed shortly after his death and permanently abolished slavery in the United States. Today, Abraham Lincoln's image graces our monuments, our currency, and our collective memory. His words, "Government of the people, by the people, for the people," continue to inspire not just Americans, but people around the world who strive for freedom and equality. Lincoln's legacy reminds us that one individual, guided by a sense of justice and morality, can change the course of history. Lincoln's fight for equality is still relevant today. The struggles for civil rights and justice in modern America are part of the legacy he helped create. His life is a reminder that progress is possible, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. Abraham Lincoln was more than just a president. He was a man who stood for the highest ideals of humanity: freedom, equality, and justice. His life reminds us that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, a single individual can make a profound difference in the world. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Abraham Lincoln. Let us remember the lessons he left behind and continue to strive for the equality and justice he envisioned. Subscribe for more deep dives into history. And until next time, let's keep learning from the past to shape a better future.